Hi, and welcome to the Human Systems Intervention Channel. My name is James Conklin, and today I'm going to be talking with Louise Pauze, who's the principal and founder of a consulting company in Montreal called HappyCo. She's been running this company for about 11 years now. And she's also a graduate of the Human Systems Intervention Master's Program at Concordia University in Montreal. Her work with HappyCo tends to focus mainly on strategy and culture change. And I know that she also does some brand related work. And she has told me that her goal is to maximize a client system's contribution to the larger system that it's part of. So she's picturing that we tend to work with organizational systems that are embedded in larger ecosystems, and she wants to help those client systems to maximize their contribution. So she's going to step us through a case study today, and let's hear from Louise.
Hi, Louise. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you giving us your time like this. And so my understanding is that you're going to be presenting a sort of case study of a large system transformation, so large, in fact, that it lasted over several years, involved many thousands of people. And I'll just let the people who are watching this now know that our intention is, as we've discussed earlier, our intention is that today you're going to kind of step us through one way of looking at the big picture of this large transformation, and you've agreed to come back to talk about some of the specific interesting points in this overall process. And so we'll be posting some additional videos about this particular transformation later in the year. But to start with, then, I'll just sort of turn things over to you so you can start sketching out what was involved in this big project.
Well, thank you, Jamie. And it's great to be here in the launch of this new HSI channel. That's really, really cool. Yeah, this was a big project. And like I think I mentioned to you when we were talking about this earlier, one of the things that occurred to me when I was thinking back to the project is just how much the system actually went on the hero's journey. And like Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey, and he says, often when the hero is presented with an invitation to the quest, and the first step, according to Campbell, is the hero refuses, doesn't go on the quest. And then often there's a second invitation. And if there's going to be a story, then the hero accepts to go on the quest. And then there's all the trials and tribulations and difficulties that the hero has to overcome. And then if the hero is successful, he returns back and having transformed himself, really. And it just dawned on me how good a metaphor this was for the project that I'm going to describe.
Okay.
So what it was, the system I was working with was an organization, an association, who had 15 offices across the country, across Canada, in which you had about 200 staff working. Now, this is deceptive because around the 200 staff, there was also 1,500 volunteers who were in different governance positions, and 4,500 volunteers in all, with all the committees that they had, and over 30,000 members on total across Canada. So a pretty big system. We worked with them, HappyCo worked with them for 4 years in 3 consecutive mandates. The first mandate, where I was alone working on the first mandate, it was a bit of a prequel, if you will, to the core mandate we'll talk about. And what happened there is we uncovered the core issue and unfroze the system. And then that resulted in a big RFP, which led to the core mandate that we'll talk about, in which the system redefined their strategy and made some really big decisions on transformation to their governance. And then there was a sequel, if you will, where we were asked to come back and just help structure the implementation plan. And that was it in terms of our involvement. But what's interesting is that there was me in this first part. But then the second part, it was a bigger mandate. I had to put a team together. There was about 20 of us. And in the 20, we had 5 HSIers.
Right.
Really cool.
So when you talk about you use the hero's journey metaphor, and you talk about the prequel, I'm kind of guessing that it's during this prequel or immediately at the conclusion of the prequel that you talk about that we've got the refusal of going on this journey.
Yes. Well, what happened was the senior people in the system, senior managers, were starting to wonder, I wonder what we're doing, what impact it has, and how well are we doing in terms of the different things that we do for members. And there was a sense of maybe they weren't always hitting the mark. And so they thought, we should have this operational review. And this was a very decentralized system where things being done in different provinces were not necessarily always shared. So they thought, we need this operational review. We need to find out what everybody's doing and what's working. And they came to the board. And so let's look at the board as our hero in this situation. And the board said, yeah, you know what? I don't think we need this. It's going to mean a lot of resources, and we're doing fine. So board refuses the quest. And then somebody new comes into the organization. She became my contact client. And she also felt that something was amiss. And she had this strong intuition that it was important to go out and talk to members and find out what members thought of the association. And so she said to the board, we need to do this brand audit and talk to members. And for some reason, the board maybe saw this as less intrusive or more innocuous, but they said yes. So they accepted the quest on the second try. And I was asked to come in and do this brand audit and speak to members and find out. So what I did first is I spoke to managers. There was about 30 managers across the country to whom I spoke. And this gave me, before talking to members, this did 3 things for me. The first is that it briefed me, because talking to the managers, I was able to assess what are the key issues? What are the questions they have? Where are the places that I need to be more attentive with members, or where do I need to shine a light? So it was a really good briefing for me. It was also a good way to start engaging them in the process. And also managers, they're managing, they're busy. They've got really busy schedules everywhere these days. And just to take that break and start thinking through some of the things that they're living through is helpful and does engage them. And of course, it starts to build trust, because when somebody's listening to you, really listening, there's a trust being built. So it helps the relationship as well. So I did that first. And then I went to interview 75 members, potential members, lapsed members, people who had not renewed. And what all this came back to, and what I found out, was that there was a relevance deficit. And that was a pretty scary thing, because it meant that people were saying, I've been a member for a long time, so I'm just renewing out of habit, but there isn't really a compelling reason why I'm a member. And not everyone, of course, but enough people that this was actually preoccupying. So before feeding back this data, I thought, my God, I need to have a little more assurances. So I did a bit of research on the associative world. And I found out that the associative world at large was going through a very turbulent time. And this was a result of significant shifts in demographics, as well as the changes that we've been going through in technology. So demographics, for instance, in their case, to put a magnifying glass on it, if you were to consider the 1950s, their world, and pretty much all the professional world, was 90% white males. In their industry today, there's a majority of women, and there's more and more diverse profiles. So very big shift. Also, technology, when you consider what technology has done, people would join an association because they wanted to network. And so this was done through cocktails. But now you network at your desk through social media. So big shift. And people would also join because they wanted information about their field. But I mean, access to information today, the World Wide Web is full of information. There's a gazillion places to go for that. And also that there's been, definitely in their field, but I think in many, many fields, an uber specialization. And so people aren't doctors anymore. They're neurosurgeons involved with the brain when there's a cancer situation, or they're psychologists that are clinical psychologists working on PTSD in children. And they want to be talking with people that are doing pretty much the same thing they are. So they want, the general services are no longer sufficient. They want something very highly personalized. And the global economy and all these things are having a tremendous impact on the associative world. So in their case, the numbers weren't showing this so much, because when you look at large, there's a lot of associations out there that are dwindling, that are really going through hard times, that are disappearing even. But their numbers were strong. Their numbers were maintaining themselves, which was a bit of an illusion, because at the same time, people entering the field were increasing enormously, so that their market share was decreasing, and that was the canary in the mine. Right. And when we were able to find this, it showed a situation that was much more alarming than what was initially seen. And so of this, there's really two interesting lessons learned, I feel, in that first part. And the first thing is the importance of qualitative data. Mm. And I find that oftentimes clients put more emphasis or prefer quantitative data. And somehow it feels more robust, so it feels more trustworthy when you can say, well, we talked to 1,000 people, or we heard back from, and so there's confidence that in the numbers. But what I'm finding is that, although I'm all for quantitative data, when you don't know what you're looking for, and when you don't understand what you're trying to measure, measuring it won't give you a lot of information. Mm-hmm. And so in their case, what was really interesting, and where this really was brought home, is that after the qualitative study was done and this information came back to them, they went back to a lot of quantitative data that they had, and they were able to read through it with a different lens. And this data was actually supporting what the qualitative study had found, but nobody had seen it before because we didn't have the right lens to look at it, and we couldn't quite understand it. And so HSI puts a lot of stock in qualitative data, and I think it's important that we emphasize the importance of it in helping us understand people and a phenomenon, and make some links between the behavior that we might want to measure, but understand where it comes from and what's the motivation or what's the belief that explains it. Right. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece that came out really strongly here for me was just how important it is to unfreeze the system. Cotter talks about it, and it's his first step of his 8-step change process, where he says that you need to create a sense of urgency. And he posits that you need to have 75% of managers convinced that the status quo is very dangerous, and that stepping into the unknown is actually a more rational thing to do. And this is really important because, frankly, if it's not necessary, who wants to change? And it's so difficult, and being able to people will therefore resist change. So that unfreezing of the system that came with data that we were able to bring back And we talked to the senior managers first, and then we went to the executive group of the board, and then it was the board at large and their constituents further out and across the country. And the president of the board was instrumental in because he really got that status quo would be the riskiest thing they could do. And so that became the impetus for change that resulted in the massive RFP that they then sent out.
Right. Okay. So I want to ask you about that, but first, there's just something I'm curious about, and I know that the work that you do involves both working in relation to brand, working in relation to culture, and in this particular initiative, you started out with a mandate that had you looking at the brand of this organization. That was that they were asking questions about this, and yet where that led was to something that was not unrelated to brand, but you might say was more related in the end to perhaps the organization's culture. And
Absolutely.
so what I'm curious about is, given that your very interesting stance, doing work in relation to brand, doing work in relation to culture, is there a relationship between these two concepts as they are brought to life in different organizations?
Absolutely. To me, they're the two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
In the sense that cultural is internal facing and the brand is external facing.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when we think of brands, we think of communication, we think of websites, we think of logos. But really what I'm focused on when I'm doing this work is not so much the expression of the brand and the logo and things like that, but the essence of the brand. So one way to look at that is to say, you know, a logo is like a person's name, but that's not the person. And in the same way, the brand is not the logo. The brand is really, it's about who you are and what you stand for and what you can offer and what you do, but it's much more essential than the external representation of it. And so they're very, very intimately linked.
So Edgar Schein says something about, in his work on culture, he talks about the different levels of culture, including that which you can actually see and touch, and then the underlying layer of culture. And so the way that you're talking about it, in a way, one of the ways that it kind of occurs for me is that brand then is kind of an expression of organizational culture, you might say, organizational character, maybe, that shows up in the way that an organization presents itself to the world and interacts with its customers, let's say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And when one of the expressions of a brand, if you're thinking of the organizational brand, it's the customer service. You're touching on customer service, and where does the customer service quality come from? It comes from the culture of the organization.
Right.
So they're very, very intimately linked.
Okay. So you got us up to the point of the RFP, and I'm very interested in this, in part because it's my impression that some of the people who, for example, like you and I, graduate from the HSI program at Concordia, and others who are working in this area, shy away from RFPs. The RFP process belongs to the bigger players, and we kind of are darting around in the shadows where they're not operating. But you were presented with a large, significant RFP, and you went for it. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it was certainly a big RFP, because when they defined the project scope that they wanted to look at, I'll just read you one sentence from the beginning of that RFP. They defined it as including every aspect of how the organization is structured, directed, governed, makes decisions, operates, provides value, communicates, manages relationship, and defines accountability.
Oh, wow.
So in other words, this is still them. Everything is on the table, and there is no such thing as a sacred cow. Now, of course, we would find many sacred cows down the but it was really all-encompassing. It was this huge thing. So what was obvious here is that I had done the first part alone. There was no way I was going to be able to do this part alone. So I needed to have a team. And so I put together a team. We put together the RFP. And interestingly, to your point, I was told later, or have understood through the lines, that we were pitching against the big consultant groups,
Right.
In this particular RFP.
Right.
And I'm sitting here because, of course, we actually got it. And I was told later on by my contact client, which this was now a different contact client, that there was two main reasons why we actually got it. So the first reason is that we were able to present a proposal which was highly personalized to the organization. And
Right.
this was because I had spent almost a year in the system. And so I had perhaps a bit of a better understanding of how they worked. And also I had picked up on a few cultural norms, and I really used that in the proposal. It was not cookie cutter at all. It was really specific to them, to their environment, to their people, to their departments. I was very specific in the kinds of things I spoke of. So that was the first thing, because they felt that, this is really for us. And then the second reason, which is something that I am really proud of and happy with, is that it was because of the HSI values. And that was something that I put forward very clearly in the proposal. And the introduction, in the very first page, I closed in saying, the perhaps the most important distinctive feature of this proposal, or the most important feature, at least if it's not distinctive, but it ended up that it was, is that we're putting a lot of emphasis on stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
And I specifically said, no matter the interesting insights you might have, no matter the brilliant strategy you might develop, if you don't have stakeholder engagement, you won't have people there believing in implementing this,
Right.
and it won't happen. So, and they bought into that. That's the two reasons, therefore, that they said that my little Happy Co. and the team that we put together was chosen vis-a-vis more bigger players out there.
Right. Yeah. So So I don't want to mention those bigger players, but I want to make sure that people who are listening understand that we're talking about some of the major consulting organizations in North America. These are they used to be called the Big Five. Maybe there's 7 of them now, or maybe there's 4 of them now. I'm not sure. But these are the big consulting organizations that typically go after multi-million-dollar, multi-year contracts. You were competing against them, and you won. So I just think that is so great, and that this client understood the significance of getting the stakeholders, getting the people who are implicated in the situations that the work is going to address, getting them involved in a meaningful way, not just sort of trying to come up with something and then using smoke and mirrors, trick them into buying into it, but rather involving them in a meaningful way in the work as it moved forward over the years.
Absolutely. And I think that partly the reason why they were convinced of this is because they were very decentralized, like I mentioned before, and 1,500 people involved in governance. That's a lot of stakeholders.
Right. Yeah.
So there's an innate understanding that if you don't bring these people on board, at some point they're going to say, no, I'm not going. And you're not going to have, and they had tried at least 2 significant times that I'm aware of to make big changes, and that hadn't been possible. So I think they were keenly aware, and this contact client, this new contact client, this individual, she really, really got it. And she later on in the process, after a few years, she had started saying, we did it the HSI way. And that meant participative stakeholder engagement. Of course, nobody understood what that meant, but then she'd explain it. And she said, no, we engaged. So that was actually a lot of fun.
Yeah. So particularly, newcomers to this kind of work, I really want to emphasize what Louise is saying, that not only does it work, but also the people that you're going to be working with, the clients that you're going to be working with, are going to get it. They're going to understand that this is working, and it's different from other things that we've tried in the past, in part because we're not doing things to people. We're doing things with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I always, or often, not always, but often emphasize this stat that we have that, whether it's 70 or 80% of change efforts fail. And I often bring this back to clients, and I say, there's a reason. And we know the reason, except we keep doing it the same way and we keep getting the same results. So let's try something different.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's one of those things that from time to time, because of the kind of work that I do, I go into the social science literature now and then, and I'm looking for citations, looking for studies that support this notion. And unfortunately, there's never been what we might call a definitive study that clearly establishes that, let's call it, stakeholder employee engagement in change processes is a or the critical success factor. So there's not a definitive study, but there are a number of studies, very good studies, that say one of the findings from what we looked at is that the way that people were meaningfully involved in the work, the way that the people who need to accept and bring the change to life were meaningfully involved in the work, was clearly a facilitative part of the overall process. So we have evidence. We don't have the knockout punch, the home run, but we do have pretty good evidence from the scientific literature backing up what you're saying right now.
That's an interesting doctoral topic.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed Louise's presentation today. And I want to let you know that Louisa said she'd be very happy to answer questions from you if you are interested in getting in touch with her. You can see there her website and also her email address on the screen alongside me. And also, I just wanted to close by saying that we're going to be posting additional videos approximately once a month, and Louisa said that she'd be willing to come back and tell us a little bit about some of the specific things that happened during this lengthy project that she's been describing to us. And for those of you who are interested in hearing more about the graduate program that Louise is a graduate from, the Human Systems Intervention Program at Concordia University, I'm just showing you here the title of the program and where it's located. You could do a Google search on Human Systems Intervention, Concordia University, and you'll be able to find information about this program.